So I'm going to be talking today about an ecological study that I carried out in southern Kenya on a floodplain ecosystem. And this is a really interesting area because it brings together a lot of these wildlife conservation issues with human impacts, human development, and social issues as well. So before I get a little bit too into talking about that, let me quickly introduce myself to a few of you who don't know me that well. My name is Kasmira. I'm currently in my last year of a biology degree with a specialization in conservation. A couple of years ago, I was selected to be a participant in the Canadian Field Studies in Africa program, which is a really amazing research program that runs from the University of McGill. You travel through Uganda, Kenya, and into Tanzania. We work with about 5 or 6 different research organizations, both from a conservation ecological standpoint as well as human social impacts. It was through that field semester that I met an amazing team with the African Conservation Center and an organization called Soralo, which is the South Rift Landowners Association. And I was really inspired by what they were doing and the area that they were working in. So we stayed in contact, and last year around this time, I went in January, I was able to do a 6-month internship with them. So, sorry, is there someone? Yeah, okay. So you can just come on.
Oh.
Come on in, grab a seat. So ACC works on a variety of issues, but specifically they have an amazing study location in the southern Rift Valley of Kenya. So this red circle here highlights the area along the sort of Kenyan-Tanzanian border where our field research is located. This is a really interesting part of the whole East African system because you have sort of to the west, the northwest there, you have the Masai Mara Game Reserve in Kenya, which is part of the larger Serengeti Mara ecosystem, which many of you know from the Wildebeest and all of those lovely television shows. And then to the east you have the Amboseli Kilimanjaro ecosystem, and to the south of the Olkematian and Shampole group branches, you have the Lake Natron system, which is a breeding ground for the flamingos, one of the largest in East Africa. So situated right in all of this amazing preserved land and biodiversity, you have this corridor here called the Kajiado District, which is a section of group ranches. And a group ranch is an area that's owned by a group of Maasai pastoralists. And the photo down here is actually a meeting I was at one of the group ranches that was next door to us. They're voting on trying to start up their own conservancy and their own conservation work. But the areas that I worked in, Olkematian and Shampole group ranches, exceptionally progressive group ranches. They set up a conservancy about 11 years ago, have active protocols in terms of grazing and in terms of keeping the land communally owned, which allows them to follow migration patterns that are very sort of fundamental to their society and to their culture, and it allows them to utilize the land based on foraging sites. This is really important because this is a very dry area of Kenya, and foraging, you need to travel where the rains have come in order to find good foraging sites. So between the conservancy acting as a grass bank and the land being communally owned, they're able to then still be, to a certain degree, nomadic, and therefore move their cattle to sort of echo these traditional migrations. So the area that I focused in on is the base of the Wassamira River, which is in the Shampole group ranch that I showed you. And this site is a particularly important dry season grazing area. So this system operates in sort of a wet season, dry season system. So you have large inputs of rainfall around this time into April, and then again in October. So the rest of the season it's very, very, very dry. So a floodplain system, which is highlighted here in sort of the lighter green color, is a system where every wet season, so twice a year, that black line, which is the main dry season channel, floods up to those levels, and then as the dry season progresses, the water comes back down to the dry season channel. To the south there we have a permanent marsh system. And this river system flows down into Lake Natron, which I was talking about earlier. So it's really part of a larger system. But the major importance of this area is all of the grazers that come to use this area during during the dry seasons and in times of drought. And this was particularly highlighted at the end of 2008 and into 2009, when southern Kenya saw one of the worst droughts that it's seen in about 30 to 35 years. So in living memory of a lot of the pastoralists who lived there. And interestingly, the Maasai that lived in the Shampoli and Okimatian group ranches saw significantly less losses in their livestock when compared to group ranches in the Amboseli ecosystem, and about 30% less losses. In Amboseli, people were 90% plus. A lot of ranchers lost every single one of their cattle. This is a really extreme situation, and if we did a lot of surveys during that time asking people, why do you think you were able to save some of your cattle? What factors, helped you to make these decisions of where you should go and how to find what limited grazing there is during a drought? And they said that the Shampoli swamp was the #1 reason why they were able to keep a lot of their cattle that people in other areas, weren't able to do. So this really highlighted for us and for the organizations that are working in this area as to why this area is just so important both to the pastoralist economies and to the wildlife in the area. So that leads me to our main question. We were in understanding all this stuff in the past that's gone on in these dry season grazing areas. We wanted to ask, how are herbivores using this floodplain, and what impact is that having on the vegetation community? So to start asking that question, we set up the study site in a very permanent part of the floodplain. This photo is actually taken from a paper by Lambden and al., and they did a GIS study looking at NDVI values, which basically gives you a reflection of light and how well. So they were able to actually look at where the areas were being very highly productive and map out exactly where the floodplain was going over a 30-year time period. So we had a really clear idea going in the extent to which this floodplain exists. So we set up 7 transects that run east to west, and along each transect we sampled every 200 meters for a total of 49 plots. And this is Nixon, who is demonstrating our pin frame, which is the method that we use to do our vegetation calculations or sampling. So it's a really simple A-frame that's made out of PCV tubing, and there's 10 spokes coming through here, which we call pins. They're about the same diameter as a bicycle spoke. And what you do is you set this up in your plot, and then you count every single time a piece of vegetation touches a pin. And for every single touch or hit of a piece of vegetation on a pin, we categorized it as green or brown, as grazed or ungrazed, and we gave it a species identification. A lot of the time we didn't have much information on the species in the area, so we just gave it a code to be able to identify it as we went along as the same species. We also did a couple of other measurements at each plot. So we took dung counts in a 1 meter radius circle from the center. So we were looking to see what dung was there, and we identified it to species as accurately as we could. Maasai are really great at that. I mean, when they live on the land, they can tell you pretty quickly what it is if you had ever had any sort of ambiguousness. We just we either consult some of the elders or other people in the area, or we just write that down in our data. We also did soil sampling on transect 1, 3, and 7. So we took soil samples at 15 centimeters, and we analyzed those for texture. And we did litter measurements as well. In certain areas there was a lot of decomposing mass from the last sort of flooding event, so we actually just measured the degree that was from the substrate level right up to the level where we actually had green and still living biomass. So with all of this now collected, and with this larger question of trying to figure out how the herbivores are using the floodplain and how that's interacting with the vegetation, we asked 3 successive questions. And the first one is, how are those plant species associations and abundances distributed across the floodplain? what environmental factors are then associated with the patterns that we see, and then focusing in specifically on grazing. Where is that impacting the system? How is it impacting the system? And how much can we tease apart where that impact is really focusing in on? So, for the first question, we're asking how are species associations sort of distributed across this floodplain. We did something called non-metric multidimensional scaling ordination, and this is a two-dimensional output of that. Basically what you're looking at is every one of these triangles on here is one of our plots, and space along this graph is a measure of distance or similarity between a plot. So plots that are really, really close together, like these two or like these two, are very, very similar in both their species abundances and sort of a richness level. And species that are very far apart, or plots, sorry, that are very far apart, so that this plot and this plot are very dissimilar. So one of the main take-home messages from this is that there's two really strong associations going on here. So you have one grouping going on over here, and then one grouping going on over here. And not only are these groups very strongly associated with each other, but they're actually very dissimilar from each other. So you need, through cluster analysis, we were able to show that you need 100% of the variation within all of the sample data to be able to connect one plot from here to one plot from this group. So these groups are very statistically different in their species. So the next question that we wanted to know was sort of, okay, so we have this theoretical, all these points kind of match up, like where are these points spatially on the floodplain? So this group, the south group here, is what I'm calling it just so you can sort of follow along when I talk about it later, is the spatial grouping from the top right, and this is from the bottom left of the previous graph. And you can see that these aren't really randomly distributed. You're not finding one over here, one over here, one over here. There actually is spatially a correlation